Here. It's amazing how different the space feels when you start moving some furniture around. It's a little bit changes a lot, it seems. The second scripture reading continues where we had left off with the first, in the 15th chapter of the Gospel according to John, the 12th verse now. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. I do not call you servants any longer, because the servant does not know what the master is doing. But I have called you friends, because I have made known to you everything that I have heard from my Father. You did not choose me, but I chose you. And I appointed you to go and bear fruit that will last, so that the Father will give you whatever you ask him in my name. I am giving you these commands so that you may love one another. May God's blessing continue to rest upon and flow through the experiences of Scripture on this day. May it guide the meditations of our hearts and the words of my lips. This is a comfy seat. Last week, we were invited to abide. Actually, it was a little bit more than an invitation last week. The Greek verb tense that was used was a command of sorts. It was the imperative. Abide. Then we spent time unpacking what that meant, the various ways that we might abide. And today's text picks up in the same spot. In fact, we heard the same text again to help bring us to this point. To remind us that we are in an upper room space. That we are in the final week of Jesus' earthly ministry as he is preparing the disciples for his journey to the cross. We are reminded that the disciples have been hearing not just notes of triumph, but predictions of tragedy. Now, John's gospel, Jesus is in control because Jesus is God and has been the Word since before the beginning of time, but the disciples live in a moment. And in that moment, in that upper room, they are dealing with Jesus' impending departure. John's community of faith is dealing with separation, pain, and anxiety of its own. And so when Jesus includes in his long final discourse a command, a call, the imperative to abide, he's telling them to hang together. And then he follows with this command, specific command language. This is my teaching to you. It's like the 10 best teachings that come down from Sinai. This is my best teaching to you. Love one another. Love one another. Seems straightforward enough. 5 letters in Greek, 4 letters in English. We made it even simpler in English. Love one another. And when Jesus outlines this for the disciples, he says, listen, you've got to do this because you need to understand the nature of the relationship that we are working in. I and God are one. In John's gospel, Jesus is God. And throughout the gospel, Jesus says, I and God are one. I do the things of God. I follow the will of God. And now, Jesus says, you, the disciples, and I are one. And if you do the things that I do, then you are doing the things of God as well. And so I am commanding you, as God commanded me, to love one another. Agape, that's selfless giving, life-affirming love that embraces everyone and everything. I am commanding you to do this because you are connected to me. Not just as servants, Jesus says. This isn't a case of me setting you aside to do a specific task in the realm. You will be doing that. But no, this is me talking to you as an equal. Just as in John's gospel, Jesus and God are equals, Jesus is setting aside the disciples as equals, as friends. Friends who carry each other's secrets and understandings of the world. For Christ has revealed fully to the disciples what has been revealed to Christ. Now, the disciples are fully human and they get it about as good as the rest of us get it. We struggle with it, right? The command is easy enough, love one another. The actuality, a little more challenging. But there it is. Friends, love one another. In the midst of all of the anxiety of what's going on, in the midst of the high point of triumphal entry, in the midst of the glory of God with us, imagine being in the room with Jesus. And if you have a hard time imagining it, just look around the room. The face of God is present already. And imagine the anxiety that comes from Jesus saying, I'm leaving, I'm going away. Where I'm going, you can't follow. The anxiety of being in a community that is being rent apart because of issues of faith and issues of policy and procedure and everything else, secular authority and religious, that is divisive in the world. And Jesus says, love one another. Dear friends, that's my command, my best teaching. The thing of God, for God so loved the world, John's gospel tells us. Love one another. And that love is a font of joy. In the midst of all that is anxious, the love is the font of joy. And the disciples are looking around the room and they have this incredible range of emotions. And we know that the range of emotions is tiring. And Jesus says, love one another. If you can pull that off, then you've done everything. You've done all of John's gospel in its fullness, all of Jesus' teachings in its fullness, if we can find a way to love one another. That love does not come easy. It is a challenge. It is directly connected to this abiding that Jesus tells the disciples about just a handful of verses before. If we are connected, then we can love. And if we love, then that fruit of loving goes out. And if we remember from last week that grapevine image, the abiding fruit that comes forth, it's not for the vine. When Jesus talks about the disciples loving one another, it's not a fruit that is solely for the benefit of those in the room. Because in the ancient world, in the world that Jesus was operating in the world that the early people and followers of Christ were operating in the world that Paul is writing in and that John is writing in, the way the community treats the world, the way those inside that upper room choose to treat the world is the way they will treat each other. They will know we are Christians by our love. There's a great meme that went around. Someone was wondering if they should put a little fish logo on their business card. And it's a cartoon of Jesus saying, well, why do you want to put a fish logo on your card? Well, so that people know that I'm Christian. And Jesus says, well, how about you just act like it? John's community is a community that feels threatened by the outside world. It is pulling in and turning to itself to try to hold on. And there's a call within John's gospel for the community to hang on and to hang together, to love one another. But in that call is also that understanding, that context of the way we treat those outside of this community is the way we will treat each other. So when Jesus says, "This is my command," to love one another, it's not just the folks in the room. We might find that a little bit easier or perhaps a little bit more challenging depending how we feel about the people in the room. But the call, the command, the imperative does not stop at the walls. When the kids came in, it wasn't just the folks from Wycliffe loving the kids from Wycliffe and the folks from Lynnhaven Colony loving the kids from Lynnhaven Colony. And it wasn't just us loving the kids connected to VBCC and those other folks, well, we loved them because they showed up. It wasn't one of those sorts of things. No, we were doing what we were commanded to do. And those kids embodied that love back to us. As we are called to abide, we are indeed commanded to love. We are called to not just embrace each other as best as we can, we are called to embrace the world. It takes big arms to embrace the world. It takes a whole lot of tooling to embrace the sanctuary, but you know what? We pulled it off. And so when Jesus says, "This is my command," this is the one most important thing that we can do. Love each other. And we can do that because when Jesus said, "I am going away, when I go, there will be an advocate who comes." Because loving each other is hard. Sometimes we say and do things that's a little challenging. Sometimes people come along and just mess with the furniture. That advocate comes, and that Spirit emboldens us and empowers us. That Spirit fills us and transforms us. That Spirit pushes us and provokes us that we might indeed love one another. That we might be so bold as to love each other as Jesus has loved us. We didn't make that message explicit to the kids at Vacation Bible School as we told them the stories, but they understood. They understood because you see the bookshelf to the right with all those books on it? That's not just props. Those were things that the children gathered that they might share with others. Those are books that are going to be donated to CHKD and Samaritan House, that others might have stories to read and to share with the world. They are loving people they have never met because God loved Jesus, and Jesus loved the disciples, and we loved the kids. And the kids loved the world. We are commanded to love, to be church today. Thanks be to God, and amen.